This story is called Pastor Liz by Garrison Keillor. The entire Pastor Liz story is about an hour long. So today, I'm sure you're grateful that I'll only be reading part one. The story arc covers about a year in real time, the seasons, the Christian holidays, in short, life out there on the edge of the prairie. Pastor Liz, the story, is about how Pastor Liz, the person, comes to replace Pastor Inkfist at the Lake Wobegon Lutheran Church. And, spoiler alert, the beauty of these Keillor stories is how they wander. So you may not actually meet Pastor Liz until rather later than you might expect this morning. And now, Pastor Liz, Part 1 by Garrison Keillor. It was beautiful out this past week. You know, there we were, the end of March, the beginning of April, and suddenly it was getting warmer and warmer, and the ice was off the lake, and the red-winged blackbirds were everywhere, and the crocuses were poking up. But still, there were people in Lake Wobegon who were saying, just you wait, we're going to get more snow. We're going to get another snowstorm before this month is over. And they said it even into the 1st of April. And then all of a sudden, it was 81 degrees. Life was a fairy tale. It was just so easy. And people were out gardening, and you could hear the sound of lawnmowers and smell the beautiful scent of fresh cut grass. It was an interesting week at Lake Wobegon Lutheran because a bishop came through the door on Wednesday. They hadn't seen a bishop ever. Bernetta was there in the office, and she had never seen one in her life. The bishop walked in with his sort of reddish bishop shirt with the white collar, and here was a Lutheran church in his district, and he'd never heard of this church before. He walked in and he looked around, and, well, he seemed a little confused. And there was Pastor Inkfist, and they made a big fuss. I mean, he was a bishop after all, and they made fresh coffee, and Bernetta stared at him through the door, just a big white-haired man with a paunch, very dignified looking. Bernetta's kind of running into problems in her marriage. She's been married to Larry for 22 years, and ever since she started taking fish oil a while back, she's been feeling kind of restless, feeling like she'd like to move to Tuscany. But she wasn't sure how to do that. And suddenly, here was a bishop appearing before her eyes like a magical figure out of nowhere. The bishop looked at Pastor Inkfist and he said, "Where did you come from?" Which sounded like a catechism question. "We were founded by Norwegian immigrants," said Pastor Inkfist. "The church was started back in 1879. "Well then, why haven't I ever heard of you? I don't have you on my list or anything. You're in my district. I'm responsible for you." "Well, Pastor Inkfist said, I don't know. I thought we were on your list." "Well, didn't you receive any mail from us? Any notices or letters from the district office?" "Well, I mean, I figured it was because we were doing everything right." "Well, how long have you been here?" "What, me?" "Yeah, you. How long have you been here?" "Well, I've been here for 30 years. 30 years? Well, that's not supposed to be. We can't have pastors put down roots. That doesn't work. You've been here too long," the bishop said, drinking his coffee. It wasn't bad coffee. They have special coffee set aside for special guests. Angels, bishops. "We don't have pastors stick around for 30 years. You should have moved on years ago." "No, people get too familiar with you, and then you start to sugarcoat your gospel message, and you're no longer preaching the truth. This happens. People stay around too long. At Unity Lutheran down in St. Paul, that happened. Well, that happened down there. My predecessor, well, he was all occupied with other things, you know. He was occupied with this radical vegan element in the Lutheran Church, which felt that carnivores should not be ordained in the ministry, and we had to go through a lot of trouble over that. And then there was this sexual scandal where a couple of Lutheran pastors were accused of making eye contact with young women in the choir, and so that had to be all worked through. Meanwhile, nobody was supervising this pastor at Unity Lutheran. And he'd been there for years and years and years and years. And I came in and he'd been there for 20 years. And in those 20 years, his gospel message had just slowly degenerated into just, preaching about trees and flowers and the rainbows and the sun. And you know the world's full of love and everything is going to turn out okay in the end. Which is not Martin Luther. This is Rodgers and Hammerstein. So I told him to shape up or ship out, and he shipped out. And all of his parish went with him, everybody under 50. And now he's preaching in a gymnasium out in the suburbs. And he does 5 services every Sunday morning, and he's got 50,000 members. In that little Unity Lutheran church, they've got 102 members, and all of them over 70 years of age. Go figure. But no, it's time for you to move on, Inkvist. We've got to move you on. And then the bishop went off to Brainerd. He was scheduled to go up there for a conference about meeting the spiritual needs of rural people. So Pastor Inkvist had to think this over. Time to move on. His family was all in favor of it. They'd like to live in the city. More opportunities, music, education, libraries, and so on. Well, his wife, Judy wants to go back to school to become a life coach and get paid for what she's been doing as a pastor's wife for all these years. He's been offered a job at the Mall of America, which is the largest mall in the United States. Malls, mega malls, now are like hometowns to a lot of people. And these are what people are familiar with. And so people hang out in them. And of course, people have spiritual problems even while they are shopping. They need some help and they need some advice. And some people like to be married, so there's a chapel of love there, so he would be marrying people. And these old people who walk around up and down, up and down, up and down the mall for exercise, when they die, they like their ashes to be deposited out there in the columbarium, which is in between Banana Republic and Eddie Bauer. And so there's a place there for a chaplain in the mall. And he'd be paid $150,000, 3 times what he ever earned in Lake Wobegon. He told Judy, he said, "This is transitional, you know. This is just transitional." She didn't care. She liked the idea of a change in their lives. They would be able to walk down the street and nobody would be looking at them to see if they were holding hands, to see if they were getting along or not. Nobody would comment on the fact that their light was on late the night before. Nobody would note what they were wearing and wonder if it was the sort of thing a pastor ought to be wearing. They would be just everyday people. She loved that. They loved that. So, back during Holy Week, the Inkvists said their goodbyes and they moved down to Minneapolis. Since then, the last trace of winter had vanished. The daffodils had come and gone. The rhubarb was still coming in strong, and the peas and the first lettuce were taking hold in the vegetable gardens. It was the middle of May when Kate Inkvist came back to town, the daughter of Pastor and Mrs. Inkvist. Kate had graduated from Athena College, and she came back to the parsonage to get her stuff. She walked around up to the cemetery where the kids from high school used to hang out in the evenings in the spring and in the summer and in the fall. And they used to lie back and look at the stars. And they'd talk about life, and occasionally they'd gather a rather large idea about it for themselves. Kate went through the parsonage to clean out the stuff from her closet. She packed up 16 boxes full of stuff. The interim pastor, Pastor Barbara Ham, is living there now, and Kate was sort of hoping for an invitation to spend the summer living in her old house. But that invitation was not forthcoming. Pastor Ham asked her where she was going to be spending the summer, and Kate said, "I don't know." And that was the point where the offer should have come. There was a blank, and it was not filled in. And so Kate moves on to other things, as we all do. The payphone rang on Main Street this last Tuesday. This phone hardly ever rings. It's so rare. It was disconnected for a long time, and for all we knew, it still was. But we keep the phone booth up because, well, men duck in there when they have to fart. Some days a pretty steady stream of men stumble out of the sidetrack tap and they step into that booth and they pull the door shut, and 10 seconds later they step out. It's kind of a superstitious thing. But every so often that phone does ring, and it's always mysterious when it does. This was a call from somebody in Atlanta, Georgia, and they were asking for somebody named Mitch, according to Mr. Berge, who happened to be in the booth and who answered the phone. He was drunk at the time, so it was hard to know whether to believe him or not. Well, Butch thought maybe it was for him. Maybe this was a call from his old Army buddy, Jack, saying that he was going to pay back the $300, a call that he has been waiting for 27 years. Even now, hope persists. But no, it was not a man, it was a woman, Mr. Berge said. He would know that much at least. So Clint Bunsen was thinking maybe it was the woman Mavis, who he had met in a bar down in Atlanta, when he'd gone down there to attend the wedding of his friends Al and Eileen. Maybe it was that woman Mavis. He met her in a bar, the Cecilia Bar, yeah. And she was drinking beer. She was a handsome woman, and she was a wonderful dancer. He danced a couple of dances with her, and when they sat down, she unbuckled her right leg. And she took it off and she said, "Oh, this stump is absolutely killing me. Phew, it is so hot in here," she said. "Phew," she said. She asked, "Would you mind if I took off my wig?" And then there she was. She was bald as a bowling ball. And she sat and she sneezed a powerful sneeze, and her glass eye came flying out of its socket. Clint caught it, sitting there next to her on a bar stool. He handed it back to her. She put it back in. She said, "This is a problem I've had for years. In fact, my good eye, the one I can see out of, sometimes it pops out when I sneeze." He said, "Well, isn't that interesting?" She said, "You want to see that?" No. He said, no, I don't. "Well," she said, "my optic cord is 7 inches long. And when I pop my eye out, I can hold it in my hand and I can see through it." "You can see through it?" Clint asked. "Oh, yeah, I can see through it. I can put it behind my head so I can see if my pants are on straight," she said. You know, it's just a special gift. It's a special gift. I don't know where it came from. And I also have the gift of seeing people's futures all too clearly. Yours, for example. I just met you here half an hour ago, and already I know you very well. I know your sister's name is Pookie, and your grandma's name is Gam, and your grandpa, he died 3 years ago. Well, that was all true. Clint was impressed. Mavis said, "And I know the woman you ought to marry if you intend to be happy." "Oh," said Clint. "Do you want me to tell you?" asked Mavis. Well, he wasn't sure, because he already was engaged to marry Irene. And what if she didn't name Irene? He'd come back from the Navy and Irene was angry at him because he had written her postcards and she had written him long letters. And she said, "You don't love me. You don't love anybody. All you think about is just yourself." And to prove to her that he did love her, Clint had promised to marry her. And he was about to marry her in a couple of months. So what if this woman, Mavis, should mention some TV star or some person who was unavailable to him? Then he was laying himself open to a life of bitter regret and disappointment. No, Irene was good enough, he figured. But he always remembered Mavis, and he always wondered who he should have married if he'd intended to be happy. Well, Clint thought about all of that again the last week when the search committee went down to Minneapolis for the Synod Assembly. The Lutheran Church Search Committee is looking for a replacement for Pastor Inkvist, and their work is cut out for them, and they have to move quickly. They went down to the Synod Assembly, and they went to a bunch of breakout sessions, and there was a session on spiritual gifts, which gave them the willies because you were supposed to stand up in turn as they went around the room, and you were supposed to talk about your own spiritual gifts and how you were using them, which is something that just absolutely horrifies a Lutheran. They'd just rather die than talk about these things. And the Lutherans who do enjoy talking about these things, well, they're not the sort of people that you'd want to spend a lot of time with. They went down to the Synod Assembly because they were looking for some clues on how to go about searching for a new pastor. They went to a cafe, which was around the corner from the convention center at the second break, called Kay's Cafe. It was a very nice little place. It had red check tablecloths, and the coffee was percolated coffee and not the drip kind. And so they liked all of that. And the menu looked good to them, and their waitress was a tall, handsome woman with a notable nose. And she read them the specials, and she told them which were the ones that were worth ordering. The chicken soup was good, the lentil soup was better. Stay away from the tuna salad. Stay away from the seafood pasta, that's no good at all. The pork ribs, they're okay. They ordered what she recommended, and then she pulled up a chair and she sat down with them. She said, "This is going to sound strange, but you're from Lake Wobegon, and I know that. Don't ask me how I know, but I have had a call to serve your church in Lake Wobegon, which was the last thing I ever expected to happen to me." She was a Lutheran pastor. She's from New Jersey. Her name is Liz. She had had this call the week before, and it told her to go out to Minneapolis and to get a job waitressing at this very cafe. She found a one-way airline ticket in her mailbox. It did not have her name on it. It had the name Ruth Sundgaard. But she took it to the airport anyway, and even without identification, she got through security. She put her carry-on bag through the scanner, and when she got the carry-on bag out the other end, she opened it, and there was a loaded pistol in it. The Lord at work in mysterious ways, signifying to us what we must do. So she came to Minneapolis, and here she was. She said, "You can accept me or not, but I'm coming to Lake Wobegon whether you do or not. It makes no difference because I'm following the call of the Holy Spirit." "Well," Clint said, "how do you know this is from the Holy Spirit?" She said, "Because my body trembled all over. My hands, my arms, my legs, they just shook. I walked and I walked and I walked for miles to try to settle myself down. I was hot, I was cold, and I dreamed about your town, and I saw it all so clear, and now here I am. And I did not come to bring comfort or ease or bring peace. So if that's what you're looking for, you will not receive it from me, because that is not what I have to offer. I'm not like most people in the pulpit. I actually believe what I'm preaching. And so that will be my gift to you if you choose to accept it." And now I do recommend the strawberry shortcake. She brought them 5 slices of strawberry shortcake. Even without asking, she brought 2 with whipped cream and 3 without. Then they had a long conversation with her, and never at any time did she ask them how they were. She just seemed to know.